I'm Shahar Azani, and in the news, the situation on Israel's northern border, special from the border. Every once in a while, news come out of Syria of yet another supposed Israeli attack against military bases and installations and other strategic locations in the war-torn state. It's been years now that Israel has been executing a concerted effort to eradicate the Iranian military buildup in Syria through strikes. The fight between Israel and Iran has also been taking place at sea and through cyber warfare, among other sites. Iran continues to be a destabilizing regional force whose tentacles reach far beyond its borders to Yemen, Gaza, and even South America. All this is taking place while negotiations are underway between the US and Iran on the future or present of its nuclear program. What does the future hold, and what does the situation look like on Israel's northern border today? Joining us on this wonderful special on JBS all the way from the Syrian-Israeli northern border is Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Sarit Zehavi, our good friend, founder and CEO of the Alma Research and Education Center. Sarit is an IDF intelligence veteran and a security expert. She lives with her husband and 5 children in the village of Kfar Vradim, located in the Western Galilee region of northern Israel. Sarit, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, how are you? How are things in Israel?
Well, a lot of COVID, but it's a beautiful day, a little bit cold.
Well,
fine.
You're out in the open, as we can see, enjoying the weather, and luckily without a mask. Maybe share with us exactly where are you at the moment?
Actually, I'm standing at the border, a few inches from the fence of the Israeli-Syrian border. It's an excellent timing because we have planned to come here today and film, and then you asked to talk to me. So there we are.
Amazing. Tell us a little bit about the current situation. I know that you at Alma conduct continuous research and you follow the situation in Lebanon, Syria, with what's happening in Iran. You recently came out with a striking report about Iranian activity in the UAV sphere. Maybe tell us a little bit about what UAVs are and what exactly you came up with.
Okay, so UAV can be in various sizes to, by the way, various missions, starting with intelligence gathering.
Just for our viewers who don't know what UAV is, it's an unmanned aerial vehicle, right? A drone, really.
Kind of a drone, but again, it can be in different sizes. In our report, we mentioned around almost 50 different types of drones, of UAVs, in the hands of the Iranians or in the hands of the Iranians' proxies in the region, whether it's Yemenis, Syrians, Lebanese, or others. These UAVs can be used for intelligence gathering or for transferring ammunition, or even for attack, either by what they call kamikaze UAVs, or even some of them can carry out missiles and launch these missiles against targets.
So UAV really presents a serious threat. It's not a game.
No, definitely not. And what we see in the past few years is that the Iranians invested a lot of time and money in developing these UAVs. The Iranians started the project of UAVs back in the 80s with the Iraq and Iran war. So they had the basic to develop the knowledge of self-manufacturing of UAVs. And this is how they become such a great power in this respect. Just to give you a small example, last week, the Saudis published how many UAVs attacked Saudi Arabia by the Houthis in Yemen since 2015. And they mentioned it was more than 800 UAVs that attacked Saudi Arabia from Yemen since 2015. So you can understand that this array is quite important for the Iranians, and they also equipped their proxies in the region, including those who are just across the fence here, in this kind of ammunition.
And what does it mean when you say attack? What do they do with the UAVs? Can you describe such an attack to us?
So as I've said, there is a capability of the UAVs to launch missiles, but actually most of the attacks that were carried out until today were kamikaze UAVs that actually crashed on the target. It happened many times, sometimes against the US Embassy in Iraq, for example, against ships and Navy ships, IDF, not IDF, civilian Navy ships in the region. I'm sorry for the noise. There are some cars here around us. This is an open area.
Right.
That's
quite all right. That's quite, just take care, be safe.
So yes, they use the kamikaze UAVs for various targets. By the way, for various missions that the Iranians identify, either for attacking their own enemies in the region, as I've mentioned, Saudi Arabia, sometimes against the Americans, as they did 2 months ago in the American base in Tanaf, which is on the border between Syria and Iraq, and sometimes also to create involvement in other countries in the Middle East, in the region, as they try to assassinate the Iraqi prime minister again a few months ago.
And from what you're able to analyze, how successful have they been using that UAV army? And has there been any significant response from opposing forces when it comes to countering this threat?
Unfortunately, I don't think that the response was bold enough in the cases that I've just mentioned, in the examples that I've just mentioned, and there are many more examples also against Israeli-owned ships in the Arab Gulf. But I can say that the attacks were usually, not all of them, not lethal. These were small UAVs that crashed on the target. For example, they didn't succeed in killing the Iraqi prime minister. When we speak about Saudi Arabia, they did cause damage. They did kill a few tens of Saudi citizens in those 7 years that are being used against the Saudis. So it really depends on which kind of UAV they use, for what mission, and in which opportunity, and how many were used at the same time.
You know, you're talking to us about the UAV army that Iran has been developing and its work in Yemen. And we are reminded by the fact that Iran is a destabilizing force across the region and beyond. And it goes far beyond the nuclear issue. It's on the what we call the day-to-day terror, isn't it, Sarit?
Exactly, and this is what we see also with regard to the threat against Israel, because our understanding in the Alma Center is that Hezbollah already has around 2,000 UAVs as well, from various kinds, those who can attack us with very accurate capabilities in attacking targets for long distances, kind of complementary to the missiles array that Hezbollah built in Lebanon.
You at the Alma Center, you're following the situation up north. We've seen, again, according to foreign sources, a lot of Israeli attacks in Syria on various strategic locations, and even some sort of an intensification of these attacks in the last few months. How do you see the situation from your end?
I can't say that there is intensification with regard to Israel by itself. You know, in the past 2 years, it's different. In the past 2 years, or maybe even 3 years, the northern border is a little bit more busy, but and yet it's not a border of war. Okay, it's not like it is in Gaza, and yet I feel usually safe to go on the border and you know, even to visit there with my children. When I don't feel safe, I don't go, of course. But I do see intensification in the past few months when we speak about the clashes between Iranians and Americans. And here I see, and there were few attacks, including last week, using UAVs by the Iranians against American presence in the region.
And what has been the US response to these attacks?
I don't think there was.
And at the end of the day, how do you see the Iranian interpretation to this lack of response by the US and other forces?
Well, first, I must say that you should put this in a wider context. It's not only a response toward a specific attack. It's much more than that. And of course, yes, I also wrote about it now. the interpretation of the Iranians to the US policy, by the way, again, not only recently, when we speak of the past decade of withdrawing from the Middle East, is an interpretation of weakness. And I believe that there is a great meaning to send a message of strength and power to the Iranians. And this could be done by various means. One of them is responses to UAVs attacks, but there could be also some other responses and some other actions that the Americans can initiate to send a very clear message: don't mess with us and don't mess with our allies in the region.
You know, we just commemorated the anniversary of Qassem Soleimani's assassination by the Trump administration. From your perspective as an intelligence analyst, how impactful was that assassination to the Iranian buildup in the Middle East and in the region?
I think it's very important because this is exactly the right way to send the messages I was talking about. Eventually, when you assassinate this kind of figure, it may have two meanings. The one is operational, and I think the Iranians succeeded in nominating somebody else that can coordinate between the different militias, though is not as charismatic as Soleimani. And the other one is psychological. And when we speak on psychological, definitely the message was sent, but this was one incident. And we definitely need more like that that will create the right message. So actually just 2 days ago, there was a UAV attack by the Iranians against an American base in Baghdad with a small drone, while the Iranians made it very clear, or their proxies, I don't know, made it very clear that this is a response to Soleimani. It was at the same day, the annual day for Soleimani's assassination. And it was written on the flags of the drone that this is actually a revenge for Soleimani's death. By the way, the whole issue of the annual day, 2 years for Soleimani's assassination, was quite a festival in our region. We have seen ceremonies that were held everywhere, from Damascus to Baghdad to Lebanon, even in Gaza, to commemorate Soleimani, using posters, using like Israeli and American flags on the road in Baghdad where the cars can actually go over. We have seen, by the way, sometimes even protests against these festivals, like in Beirut, like in Gaza, because not everybody likes this Iranian involvement in the region. So this festival again around Soleimani's assassination was quite an experience for us as researchers to understand who is with, who is against, and how the Iranian presence in the region is actually being viewed by the different players here in the area.
So this is all happening, Sarit. All the while there are negotiations between the US and Iran. So Iran has no problem, while negotiating with the US, to continuously attack its personnel.
I think it goes hand in hand, of course. On the one hand, you create negotiations, and on the other hand, you deliver a message of threat to create, I don't know, I can't say fear, but to create confusion. And that way, maybe put a little bit more pressure on the diplomats that are negotiating in Vienna.
You know, Sarit, one of the things I like very much about the Alma Education and Research Center is the fact that you not only are you in the north of Israel really following up on the situation there, but you also have the opportunity, you know, it's a very confusing and complex reality in the north of Israel where decisions have to be made. And if God forbids things escalate, you actually have a simulation system that during regular times when people can actually enter Israel past or hopefully very quickly after COVID, people have the opportunity to engage with decision making vis-a-vis situation in the north. Tell us a little bit about that aspect of your work.
So yes, my understanding when I established Alma Center is that I do want to deal with education, but not only just speaking. It's important to create the experience. So part of the experience is standing here on the border, and another part is actually trying to become Israelis, how we feel, what do we experience, how do we make decisions in a situation of crisis on the northern border. What we have created is an educational program that after the group visited the border, visited the fence, it comes to Alma Center. And the moment they walk at the door, they become the Israeli government. And now they have to make the decisions that we make here every day or during wartime. By the way, Shahar, since COVID, we made all our educational program digitally available, including the simulation. So you don't need to come to Israel to experience the simulation. All you have to do is to arrange a few friends and we can do it by Zoom.
Oh, wow. That can be done from afar. That's amazing news, Sarit.
Yes.
You know, talk about complex situations in the north. We have, of course, Iran and Syria, but very much, like you mentioned, we have Lebanon, Hezbollah, and Iran. What's happening in Lebanon at the moment? We've heard, you know, since the grand explosion last year to deteriorating economy. Can you describe the current situation in Lebanon at the moment?
Look, we always ask ourselves, when will be the day that we will wake up and we'll see that Lebanon completely collapsed? Because the situation is really a catastrophe. There is not enough fuel to warm the houses. There is not enough, there is lack of ingredients, of basic ingredients. There is lack of medications. It is really difficult to cope with COVID at the same time. And of course, Hezbollah is taking advantage to all of that, to, on the one hand, to provide the population, especially the Shiite population, which is its base, with some of the products that are missing, not everything, but also at the same time to smuggle a little bit, for example, from the fuel into its military purposes and needs. That way, Hezbollah also gained more and more power in the systems of the Lebanese state, because there is no state. It's a failed state, actually. And Hezbollah, which is a member of the dysfunctioning government, gaining more and more power in this dysfunctioning state and actually providing services that the government itself cannot provide. And that way buying more support of its base or preserving the support of its Shiite base. On the other hand, there is growing criticism against Hezbollah in Lebanon by those who are against it. The problem is that many of them gave up desperate and are leaving Lebanon. And we see this every day. We've seen this with hundreds of nurses and doctors that left Lebanon and found positions elsewhere in the West. On top of all of that, there are always disagreements upon the investigation of the blast in Beirut, disagreements upon the government, disagreements upon the kind of relationship with the Saudis. All the time, there are disagreements that are actually paralyzing the political system in Lebanon.
When you're saying you mentioned the explosion in the port of Beirut, who is held to blame for the explosion by the Lebanese public?
Well, again, it's really difficult for me to say the term Lebanese public, because Lebanese public is diverse. It is composed of Sunni and Shiites and Christians and Druze and different interests and a corrupted leadership. But in general, I can say that those who are against Hezbollah would continue to say that probably, we don't have enough proofs, but probably Hezbollah had something to do with this blast. Probably there was something in this warehouse that caused this huge blast. Of course, those who are against Hezbollah are saying that the ammonium nitrate that blew up in the warehouse in the seaport in Beirut was there for a reason and was there for military reason of Hezbollah. Those who are with Hezbollah are saying that the judge that was nominated to investigate the blast is biased and he should be fired. And that's why actually the investigation is not going anywhere.
And when you say every morning we wake up to see, is that the day when Lebanon collapses? What does that day look like in your view? Like, what's going to happen the day after the state collapses?
First, I'm not sure we will see this day. It may take time, and it may continue to be a process. Then when you look backwards, you will understand, okay, it collapsed. But what
does that collapse mean? Like, what does it?
Okay, so I think that the basic question in this is the Lebanese armed forces. Where are the Lebanese armed forces in this? Because the Lebanese armed forces are the only super glue that was left that can actually bring together what you call the Lebanese public or the Lebanese themselves. For now, the Lebanese armed forces is still functioning with a lot of difficulties. There are rumors of even defections of soldiers because there is not enough food and the salaries don't worth anything anymore. But it is still there. It is still functioning and it is still enjoy the trust of the Lebanese public. If the Lebanese armed forces will not function at all, definitely we will see something different happening in Lebanon. Yet it does not mean that I believe that we should blindly support these armed forces, the Lebanese armed forces, because it is collaborating with Hezbollah, and we should bear this in mind.
And in the course of these crises in Lebanon, has Hezbollah been weakened or strengthened?
It depends who you ask, but of course I believe it was strengthened because Hezbollah knew how to take advantage of this crisis in Lebanon to gain more power, as I've said, to provide the services that the government failed to provide, and that way gain more support. Of course, Hezbollah is also facing challenges like the rest of the Lebanese society, but Hezbollah continues to enjoy the support of the Iranians, and we see that it succeeded in paralyzing even the investigation about the blast.
You know, Sarit, I have to ask you something that I'm sure is on the mind of many of our viewers. You're up there in the north. It all seems quiet, serene, a bit coldish, I have to admit. How do you explain the relative quiet in the north, especially when you see, you know, the cyber warfare on the side of Iran, the attacks on the ships, what's happening in Syria continuously, and yet up north in the Lebanese border, it has all in all remained relatively quiet. How do you see that happening?
So yes, Lebanese and Syrian border, in many cases when I come to the border, I immediately see either shepherds coming close to the fence like where I'm standing now, or Hezbollah operatives on the Lebanese border coming and taking pictures of me. And people are asking me, okay, aren't you afraid? What prevents them from opening fire against you while you're standing at the border? And I'm not afraid because I know that the key word is deterrent. Of course, they are capable. They can open fire, snipers, whatever, but they are deterred. And as long as Hezbollah is deterred, by the way, not only thanks to the Israeli policy, but also because it's what is actually happening inside Lebanon, as long as Hezbollah is not interested in deteriorating into an all-out war, I don't think it will try to attack Israeli civilians on the Lebanese-Syrian border. As for soldiers, this is a different business. And I think that here, IDF learned how to be very cautious and create a daily situation assessment, whether Hezbollah is intending to do anything today or tomorrow.
A few months ago, there was actually an attack from Lebanon into Israel of, I believe, rockets that landed in the north.
More than one.
And how, what's the reason that happened? And again, it did not escalate beyond that attack.
First, nobody got killed and nobody was wounded. We are talking on few attacks, starting from the Guardian of the Wall, during the Guardian of the Wall, and afterwards. Few attacks that were made by Hamas in Lebanon that is also building its power inside Lebanon. We published a full report on that as well. And then came like the biggest one, which was held by Hezbollah itself, with 20 rockets that were launched at the same time towards an area that the Lebanese call Shaba Farms, we called Har Dov, which is actually a closed military zone of the IDF, targeting soldiers. Again, nobody got hurt. Iron Dome intercepted half of the rockets. Around 9 rockets were intercepted by Iron Dome. Some landed in open areas, even in Lebanon, and some landed in open areas in Israel. Sometimes, let's say, we were lucky. We were very lucky, and causing damage like burning. And I'm saying very sadly because I saw the damage. Nature reserve in the Galilee. What caused to this attack? You will be surprised by my answer. Actually, Hezbollah first and foremost wanted to send a message inside to the Lebanese. because after a few incidents that Hamas launched rockets to Israel and actually endangered Hezbollah with deteriorating the situation with Israel, Hezbollah wanted to send a message to Hamas in Lebanon and to the Lebanese themselves. I am the boss in South Lebanon. I'm the one who is fighting Israel and nobody else, and that's why he did that. They failed not only because the rockets didn't cause any casualties, but also because the launcher and the Hezbollah operatives that launched the rockets were caught by the Druze in the town right after the launching, and the photos and the videos of the Hezbollah, the frightened Hezbollah operatives in the vehicle were published all over Lebanon, actually not sending a message of strength, but a message of weakness.
We definitely remember those encouraging images, and every day that goes by, I think the hope is similar when it comes to Lebanon or the regime in Tehran, that hopefully will wake up tomorrow to a new, more peaceful and more stable Middle East. Sarit, thank you so much for joining us, for your insights, and for the great work you and the researchers at the Alma Center do every day to explain the complexities of the region, make it accessible to all, and truly make us all understand a little more about the world we live in.
Thank you very much, Shahar.
I'd like to say to all of our viewers, what a great opportunity to join Sarit in the north of Israel, and we look forward to many more in the future. In the meantime, thank you very much for watching. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay happy. I'd like to thank our director, Sloan Copeland, JBS's managing director, Dara Golob, our technical manager, Michael Paley, transmission manager, John McDevitt, and to our wonderful producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. For JBS, I'm Shahar Azani. Until next time, shalom and להתראות.